Oh, that, you know, you're a pro.
I'm gonna have you guys put your phones on your laps.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And on vibrator.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I should not even just have mine in here, but it's off.
Rich, are you good? Are you okay?
Shit.
Oh, so far so good. Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
getting the cameras ready.
Just a minute. Thank you. And again, sorry, remember we already did the intro, so we're just trying to save you time so you
Okay.
get
Right in.
checkpoints. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, kind of.
Okay.
Just give me 2 minutes, we're trying to get
No
the
worries.
recordings going.
Oh, good. We're excited. Thank you for being here as we launch.
Chip, are you coming in?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
That's one that's in this text.
Okay, Rich?
Okay, everything is rolling.
Yes?
Rolling here, rolling here.
And we
rolling
just
here,
talk to
rolling
one
here.
another.
Oh, okay.
Audio
Is that
everywhere.
right? We
You
just
just
talk to
talk
one
to one
another.
another.
Okay.
Love that.
Okay, here we go, Rich. You're good?
Okay, so whenever you are ready, so just, and that, so you know, if you need to look at the cameras
Mhm.
for any reason, that would be the camera for you to look at.
Okay.
And that would be maybe at your end?
At the
Saying
end.
thank you for joining us,
Thank you for
then
joining us
into
for
the
the
camera saying up next we'll have, well,
Okay.
Great.
All right.
Anytime.
Okay, us. All right. Thank you for joining us today, Senator Neal. So happy to have you here. I know that recently you've done a town hall with Canyon Springs and seen a lot of the things happening in our community surrounding mental health. Can you share some of what you're seeing and some concerns?
So one of the things that popped up was during COVID, how children may not have had the opportunity to, I guess, mature within a school environment, that they actually were prevented from that assimilation, right? So you come from middle school, and then literally the 2 years that you were supposed to have been in high school, you were actually at home. And so by the time you get to high school, you're in 10th grade, and this is your first encounter with the environment with seniors, juniors, and other students. And so it appeared that there was this issue of maturity, immaturity, and then no ability for staff to cope and deal with that issue, right? I mean, because the question came up, I was talking to Assemblyman Tom Roberts, and he literally pointed that out, and he said that, you know, maybe that's the thing that we should be talking about when we talk about school violence. Why is a child feeling this level of anxiety or feeling like they may not have the capacity to fit in to the school environment and maybe reacting in ways that they probably wouldn't have reacted in if they had had a chance to be in a school environment for 2 years versus the absence of it, right? Because immaturity is real, and we know that middle school, I probably changed our whole lives, like we all hated middle school. By the time we got to high school, we were literally trying to figure it out, but 9th grade was our passage, right? It's like our rite to passage to high school to figure it out.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I was a middle school educator, so
Oh.
they ring near and dear to my heart. But I, as a parent, experienced that. I had my youngest 2 children, and one transitioned to middle school and one transitioned to high school in the pandemic, the very thing you're talking about. So,
Hold on one second, let me just
Yeah.
stop really quick. Just recheck her NS connection.
okay.
See, just a little bit lower, so just make sure we plug into the right line. And now just tap,
I'm
keep
gonna
tapping on your mic.
switch these because there's one that's not plugged in,
Okay, we
Rich.
got you there, okay,
And I
good.
could,
And let me
Rich.
see, okay, all
now
right.
try.
I got her, yeah, that's her. Yeah, that's fine, okay, you can stop tapping.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Stop tapping.
Let me hear you again, just talk.
Yes. Thank you for being here, Senator Neal. It
Okay,
was a
that sounds
pleasure to
little
see you.
better.
Does it sound better?
Do I need to be louder, or is it something I'm doing? Sorry.
Okay.
Is that
You're
okay,
okay.
Richard?
We'll pick it up at this, your question
At
that
your
you're about to
question.
ask.
Oh,
her,
okay.
with
The
this
next
line.
question? Okay.
Does that
All
sound
right.
better, Rich?
Yeah.
Does that sound
And
better?
Stand by, we're good.
All right.
Start with your question.
Yep, I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this so it's not exactly the same. Senator Neal, can you share with us what you're seeing in Nevada as far as resources and people's ability to access resources, medications, the care that they need currently after the pandemic and through this pandemic?
I think that we still need to do a deeper dive into urban communities that have limited access to care, limited access to prescriptions. I know during COVID, CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, they started the delivery process for prescriptions. But when we talk about actual mental health, like let's say you're couch surfing or you're not actually in a stable environment, that actually doesn't allow you to get that medication in the same way if you actually have an address, because you're not sharing that address, right? Maybe your health care has lapsed. You haven't had the capacity to continue to pay. What I see in my district more often than not is that we actually have someone who we know has a mental health condition in Starbucks, right? And they're hanging out. They've gotten their coffee, but it's a clear indication that that individual is off their medication. They are not in any kind of sustainable environment, and they're just, nomads traveling through the community. And I think we have to do a different model around that care team and how we find them and access them. So we have a care team that will find and access homelessness. But I don't think we have the care team that's finding individuals that may be in a mental illness, I would say suffering from a mental illness, and how do we do that wraparound care without a 72-hour hold, without sending them to UMC, but actually another type of facility that we may be able to send them to in order to get care, get them back on their medication, and potentially bring them back to their home to restabilize.
Thank you. Yes, we definitely need solutions and community of care in these times.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go to the next one. Okay. All right, Senator Neal, sometimes there seems to be a stigma about needing help, mental health, and especially in the pandemic, we've seen that many of us have had different environments and different struggles. So what can we do to make sure that people don't need to hide the mental health issues that they're going through, and to make sure that they have access, especially in our minority communities, but in all our communities as well?
I think it's about, it's a culture shift, right? It's about changing the narrative about how we view each other and how we view mental health. It's not a weakness, it's an illness. And if we start to see it as an illness and want to actually have a remedy for it, I think that changes our viewpoint and it changes how we care for each other. Within the minority community, I think more often than not, and it probably everywhere, what I see with young black males is a stoicism, right? Where I rather hold on to the trauma, hold on to what happened to me rather than share it. And then it creates this chip on the shoulder per se, which then they have no place to express it because they feel like you don't understand it. And if I ask you for help, then you're going to give me potentially the wrong kind of help. And I'll give you this example. I had a student at Cheyenne High School. He'd been through the behavioral health system, and he was finally retracing himself and finding back in a regular school. But he didn't want to talk about his past. He didn't want to talk about the behavioral schools that he'd been in. But because of that, and the teachers not knowing his background, he was constantly viewed as a person that was not participating or wasn't open or wasn't trying to learn, but he was actually trying to overcome the stigma of where he came from, try to set a new path, and within the few months, he was literally being sent to the dean. And I had to point out, because he was one of my students, I had to point out to the principal, do you know his actual background? Because his background is that he is coming from a behavioral setting. He is trying to reset the narrative for himself, and you guys keep using it against him and putting it as if this is his tragic history, rather than allowing his future to be a different pathway and a different narrative that he creates for himself. Because he doesn't want to go back there, but he also doesn't want to talk about it. So whatever that trauma was of being identified as a bad kid, he is trying to escape it, but you won't let him. And we need to figure out how to create an environment where he can talk about that and he can participate in the new narrative that he would like to create for himself and support the new behavior. Because every time, whenever we made mistakes, right, in our house, in our life, no one ever wanted your past to be brought up to you over and over and over again. What we were expecting was someone to see the new change in you and to support the new change and to help you to develop and evolve into the new person that you had set before them, right? And I think the schools, because we use academic history, because we use behavioral narratives, we're not thinking about the whole child and how that whole child can evolve. And I think that that is more of a training that needs to occur. We have cultural competency, right? We pass that in legislation. But cultural competency doesn't matter if you don't understand what that child is experiencing or learn how to not beat them up over their past, but figure out how to get them to their next step, which they're asking you to help them get to.
I couldn't agree more, Senator Neal. And that segues into our next segment with Compassionate Las Vegas and understanding that, you know, all of us at one point or another will have trauma or have it, and we want that new start and that new narrative. We want those tools that we can use to be successful, and we all need them, especially now in our community. So I am just so grateful for you for being here with us today. It is such an honor always to speak with you, and we are grateful for the legislative work that you do. I know you're almost born into that, right? And have a great history. I don't know if you want to, as we close out, just give a couple of sentences maybe about somebody, yes, about your history and maybe about someone who inspired you along the way and why you do this work. What motivates you to do that?
So, I mean, I was born into it. Literally, my dad is former Senator Joe Neal, who served in the legislature for 32 years. He passed away in 2021. But literally, he was the first African-American male to be elected into the state Senate. And the year he was elected was the year I was born. And so I literally was born into it. And so I had the benefit of joining the legislature in 2011, and I became the first African-American female to be in the state assembly. It was the weirdest trajectory. I never even imagined it. And I got the wonderful benefit of his wisdom, right, for the 11 years that I was served to help me navigate, help me understand the process, help me understand policy and how to make it for the best interests of the state of Nevada. And so he has been one of the people that inspired me the most. And even now, in the situations that we're in now, because our environment is becoming more toxic, more strange, I rely on those prior conversations for the wisdom of how to get through public service and how do you craft the best policy that's in the best interest of the state of Nevada. And sometimes that's difficult, right? Because we're polarized right now, whether or not we're on the progressive left or the conservative right. And when you find yourself in the middle trying to find the best thing for Nevada, we're in the few. And so it's hard sometimes because I criticize both sides because sometimes the middle is the best compromise for where we need to go and how we need to establish ourselves.
Thank you, Senator Neal, and thank you for being a consensus builder and a bridge builder in our community. It's duly noted, and it's a great thing that we have had a change a little bit lately with some female representation in the legislature and some of these issues surrounding children that we work for at the Children's Advocacy Alliance improving are really at the forefront. So grateful for you and all your colleagues in the work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So we have literally 8 minutes.
Okay.
If we can just go back to the beginning and introduce her again and just your first question, and you're speaking about the pandemic and sort of that gap, that would be great. I just want to make sure we're covered on that.
Okay,
I really liked it, and you kind of started a story and didn't finish it, so just so we can just put that back on top. Thanks for joining us, and your first question, give her the first question.
Thank you for joining us, and I can still say I know that you recently have been.
Yep.
Okay.
Love it all.
All right. Great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for joining us today, Senator Neal. I know that you've been recently out in the community at Canyon Springs High School at a town hall that they had recently discussing some issues in the community with mental health. I wanted to hear your thoughts and what's happening there.
So it was a school violence event that I partnered with Assemblyman Tom Roberts, and we co-moderated a panel with students, CCSD police, and principal and a teacher. And basically what came up, and this came from Assemblyman Tom Roberts, that we are suffering from children who didn't get the benefit of assimilating into high school. They spent their 2 years, which would have been their 2 years of high school, at home. So they left middle school, and then they spent 2 years being homeschooled by a computer. And so once they got to school, there was a gap in regards to offering supports within the school, not recognizing the immaturity that they may have been experiencing within the actual environment, and trying to figure out how do we support the students who may have anxiety coming into an environment where they didn't get the benefit of actually matriculating through ninth grade. As we know, ninth grade is the moment where you're able to assimilate and learn all of the mores of high school. and you don't actually get the benefit of that when you're at home. And so what was talked about was how students probably needed some additional support, additional conversation around the immaturity and the lack of assimilation into that environment, and what are some of the, I would say, issues that are popping up because of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. All right. You're a rock star.
Can we ask one
Yes.
quick thing?
Yes.
Can you maybe talk to what people could actually do, some sort
That's
of
a
call
good
to action
idea.
about
Okay.
helping?
Great.
Is
That's a
it
great
writing
idea,
letters to
Chip.
the legislator or
Yeah.
whatever? Is there something like that?
So maybe
that-
that's your question.
Yeah.
Follow up.
Senator Neal, I know that you're always solutions oriented, so what could we in the community do? What could be our call to action of how we could help make a difference with some of the mental health issues and things happening? What would you suggest?
Well, I'm going to say something super simple, and it's not writing to the legislature. It is, I think we need to move back to being more communal in our neighborhoods and in our community. When we talk about schools, it really takes the extra layer of the community and our families who have the time, who have the expertise to lean into the schools and try to offer some programs into the school. We have the capacity within in my district, the Victory model, the Zoom model, and also within this wraparound environment to go into the schools and talk to the principal and say, I would like to create a program. I would like to be a part of an extended day where we focus on this particular type of engagement, whether or not we're engaging parents around how to deal with the COVID relapse or the mental health environment that they may be experiencing. But if we actually have social workers and counselors and psychologists who don't work in the schools, we actually can go in and participate by saying, if you just give me an hour twice a week to come in and get a cohort of students that you feel are suffering, let me do some kind of counseling or conversations or groups where we can talk through our problems. And I bring this up because when I was at 100 Academy way back 2006, 2007, I realized that there were women who didn't know how to parent their kids. They were young mothers or had multiple children, and so their time to give to each child was limited. And so I went to the principal and I said, what if after school I did this class with parents, moms, young moms, and we talk about how do you get out of your own way? How do you let go of a toxic relationship? How do I help you to understand that just because, maybe you're underemployed, limited in your capacity, meaning poverty, there are things that you can do in order to overcome that to still raise your children, right? And let me give you some strategies in order to do that. And I was able to speak to that only because when I was in law school, right, I didn't have a lot of money, but I had a child and I had to figure it out. But there were things that I learned in terms of strategy in order to keep my head above water, avoiding toxic relationships, things that we know that are good for us that we can pass down to other women or other fathers who may not even have the ability to have mentorship. And I think that's how we can change the narrative. And we have to think about what can we just do in our basic selves to move into that school environment and help.
Wonderful. I can't agree more that we underestimate the value of mentorship and that out of school time. There's great potential and opportunities there. So thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah.
Love
You're awesome. So easy.
And I'll just take a picture real quick so
That
we
was
can.
really great.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
unhook you. Got it?
Yeah. And have a great flight. I hope you get some.
I'm just trying to make sure, because you never know what security is like.
I know. Yeah, especially these days, or how if your flight's.
Right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Hopefully, you should be good on a Tuesday, but.